Alright, well I think we're going to get going. Can everybody hear me? Good? Volume's good?
Yep.
Cool. Okay, so hey, I'd like to welcome you to Community Convos, Violence in the Transgender Community. Thank you to all of you for coming, for showing up in this dreary weather where I like to just be at home and comfy, but you're all here, so thank you for coming and joining this conversation. My name is Sean Hayes, and I work full-time at Menace Peacemakers as the executive assistant, and I'm kind of rolling into some of this programmatic stuff. And then I also am a member of the Men and Masculine Folks Network, which you are going to hear about a little bit later here. And then I am also a member of a group called Trans Plus, which is a local support group here in Duluth that is for trans folks, non-binary folks, two-spirit folks, anybody who's questioning gender identity. So we meet twice a month here right downtown Duluth. So I've been organizing for that group for just about 3 years now. And I found that my work with Trans Plus has now started to kind of roll into my work at Menace Peacemakers, which is a organization that works to end violence against women and children. That's their mission statement. And so when I started working there, we started having conversations about how do we become more inclusive? How do we make sure all of the voices in our community are being heard? And so that's kind of how this event came about. I'd like to take a minute just to thank a couple folks who helped with the organizing of this event, Erica Whalen and Orion Sorrell, who I don't know if they're in here or, yeah. Raise your hands. They helped me plan this. We met a couple times. I cannot thank without them. I'd also like to thank the Men and Masculine Folks Network for their support, the Minnesota Department of Health, Community and Philanthropy, and the Novo Foundation for providing funding for tonight's event. So, first off, I just wanted to start off with some community agreements for tonight's conversation. And that's kind of what we want this event to be, is a conversation where people can share their thoughts, ask questions, and kind of have that feel to the event. So, to start off, number one, this space belongs to trans and non-binary people. So we know we have lots of allies in the room, friends, family members, people who want to learn. But if you can just keep that in mind, this conversation is about the transgender community, and we welcome all of our allies, but it's also those folks we want to hear from tonight too, mostly. So keep that in mind. Number two, listen with respect. So knowing we all come from different communities, experiences, we all have our own beliefs and worldviews based on those experiences, right? So keep that in mind while you're listening to our speaker, our panel members, when you're asking questions. Try to be as respectful as possible. Number three, this is a good one. There's no quick fix. So this is the first, hopefully, of many conversations that I would like to be involved in, and I would like our community to be involved in. So, realizing that tonight we're probably not going to fix everything, but this is a good place to start, and to start having a conversation, to start talking about the problems that are here in the Northland, and then coming together as a community to think of how can we create solutions here. So, and lastly, just a reminder to silence any electronics, to be respectful of the folks who are here speaking. So, getting into it. Some of you may be wondering what this event is all about. And for myself, I came out as trans 3 years ago. Whoops, backside. And when I first came out, I was looking for support, and I was trying to find other folks who knew my experience, who could answer some of my questions, and that is how I got involved with Trans Plus. And there were a few folks, a lot of whom are in this room right now, who have been doing the organizing, planning, and all of that for Trans Plus to offer this for our community. And I wanted to make connections with folks, and then my work at Menace Peacemakers, like I said, has led me to begin learning more about domestic and sexual violence. So who it affects, what it looks like, and what resources are out there for folks who experience violence, right? So where do folks go? Do they know where to go? And are those organizations welcoming to all folks? And are they inclusive of all folks? So, one of the things that I've learned most in the very little bit of anti-violence work that I've been doing for about 6 months is that most of the statistics, a lot of what you hear from domestic violence agencies, people who are doing violence prevention work, gender-based violence work, there's many ways to say it. Most of those statistics and information out there points to cis, hetero men perpetrating violence towards cis, heterosexual women. We hear all about that. But we know that it affects more people than just that. But if we look at some of those statistics, looking at the entire country, 1 in 3 women, cis, hetero women, report physical or sexual abuse by a husband or boyfriend at some point in their lives. So that's nationally. If we bring it back to Minnesota, it's the same. 1 in 3 Minnesota women report experiencing an attempted or completed rape at some time in their lives. And the perpetrators of these assaults are almost always cis heterosexual men. So, as a trans man, I've started challenging these statistics, thinking more about that, knowing that violence happens in every single community, right? And at Men as Peacemakers and with my work with the Men and Masculine Folks Network and Trans Plus, I've been challenged to take what I'm learning and apply it back to my own community. And that's really the community where my heart is the trans community. So that's where this event came from. And at this time, I'd like to invite my friend Sheena to come up and to tell us a little bit more about the Men and Masculine Folks Network and what they're doing and what we are hoping to achieve as a community of men in the community.
Thank you, Sean. Hi, how's everyone doing? Good? Cool, okay. Since I usually forget what I'm going to say, I'm going to read it a little bit to start, and I'll just talk a little bit about myself. So yeah, we're part of the Men and Masculine Folks Network. Primarily, I started organizing 3 years ago with a group called Man Forward, and we're actually primarily based in the Twin Cities, so St. Paul, Minnesota, like in Minneapolis. Is where we do a lot of work. We meet a lot in like traditional and non-traditional spaces. Like, actually, if you ever come down to the Twin Cities, and there's a place called Hmong Village, which is pretty much just like a big a farmer's market and like a little shop where a lot of Hmong folks go. So we actually hold it like some of our sessions and conversations similar to this, like just in places like that. But I'm just sharing a little bit of context like that. Is like, I think for a long time when we think about gender-based violence, is like a lot of our communities do it in silos. Like there is like the queer community sometimes who do their own kind of work. And there was like for us this like Hmong community who do their own work. And then like I know Matt has been doing this work for a long time too. But I think it's also like how do we connect with each other and really start to do this work together and do it in a place where it's not just like tokenizing each other either. Whether that's like as like cis hetero men, how do we not tokenize other folks? So that's a little bit of the context and background. But currently, yeah, our name has moved to the Men and Masculine Folks Network. But as we began, I think it was a little bit, I want to say it's longer than 5 years ago. Because I know a lot of like the EDs like Ed and like my mentor like Peng has been doing work with each other for over 5 years. And I remember going into my first meeting about 2 years ago and just seeing this conversation of like having American Indian folks in the room and then having like white men in the room and like us being some Hmong men in the room. And now we've kind of expanded beyond that to include all the different types of men who are in the state of Minnesota. And that's like, yeah, I think it's still very new, but I think it's something that needs to be done. And then also just primarily recently we held, like I helped held a, it's called like a community meal at my home. And that was also part of the Masculine Folks Network where we had queer and trans Hmong folks actually come in and just have a conversation. And so I'm queer as well, but I'm not trans. But it was important for us to kind of have this conversation around like, actually, because like a lot of times in our community we talk about violence is happening from like the cis hetero community to us, but it's also like how do we have conversations around like sexual assault or domestic violence within our own community. It's sometimes like I think something that we've been thinking about, and what came out in conversations was like a lot of gay men in our community are actually hurting a lot of other folks in our community too. So like that was something that came up during other conversations. And so I know I'm just kind of rambling. I'm kind of all over, a little unprepared too since I just drove in. But yeah, I think it's really just good for us to kind of like do internal work, but then also really connecting with each other. So I'm excited for us to like go long term, and I think part of the mission was to really share best practices. So it's like, what are we doing in our community that's really working in a home community, or what are we doing in like our MAP or what other communities, and how do we connect those things? So yeah, I think that's my ramble.
Cool. All right, so moving right along, we are super, super lucky to have our keynote speaker, Nicole Vander Heiden, here with us today. Nicole is an out and proud queer, trans, single mom, and Iraq war veteran. She currently resides with her 2 children in St. Paul, Minnesota, where she speaks on a variety of issues facing the trans community. She also serves on the board of a group called Transforming Families Minnesota, which is a nonprofit organization down in the cities that creates an inclusive, safe space to support transgender and questioning youth and their families. She is a sexual assault survivor and is passionate about dispelling myths and misconceptions regarding sexual assault as it relates to the trans community. At this time, I'd like to invite her to come up and share with us.
Hey, how's it going? I'm gonna get comfy. I don't like standing. I'm Nicole, as Sean astutely pointed out. So I'm gonna come at this conversation from the perspective of a trans woman who's also queer, and how I've encountered violence, both from within and from without our community. I'm also on the board of directors of Transforming Families, and in that role I get this awesome opportunity to help trans kids process all of the amazing and challenging things that we go through as youth, and that can be amplified, I guess, by transgender status, as well as other intersectionalities like race and gender. Let's see, as the name of this event makes clear, this is a conversation. It's not a sit and listen to me talk. So we're going to be engaging with each other. We're going to be engaging with me and with the folks next to you. If you have a question or comment, please interrupt me. If you have something to say to the person sitting next to you, that's fine. I don't care. You go ahead and chat and have these conversations. Have this discussion about violence in our community. And to start off with that engagement aspect in mind, I just want us to move together a little bit. It looks like there's some folks who are sitting off in the far corners of the room. If you want to just join in, scooch together with folks who are near you, then you can engage in those conversations and have that discussion. Say hi, introduce yourself.
Hello, I'm Sean. Nice to meet you.
Recognize your chosen
I like
really digging like
Great. Awesome. Thank you very much. Just a content warning in case you didn't pick this up yet. We're going to be talking about some heavy stuff today. We're talking about violence. We're talking about sexual assault. We're talking about domestic violence. So if at any point in the evening the conversation gets too hot for you, that's fine. Go stand up, take a walk around the room, go get some coffee or some water in the hall, whatever you got to do. Keep yourself sane. Don't feel pushed beyond your limits in this conversation. Also, this is a broad topic, violence. There's so many different ways that we encounter violence in our daily lives, whether it's just discrimination, whether it's intimate partner violence, whether it's violence from strangers on the street. My most stark experience with violence as a trans person is with sexual assault, and so that's going to be the aspect that I'm coming at it with. Feel free to inform your discussions amongst each other and with the general group by whatever forms of violence you've experienced, or perhaps what forms of violence you may have perpetrated. Let's see here. So just to open us up, I want you to turn to the folks that you just met, that you're going to be very friendly with now. And I'm just going to give us a real quick discussion topic, just to open us up and get our minds thinking about this topic. I want you to talk about what does sexual assault look like in the trans community? Who are the perpetrators? Who are the targets? What constitutes sexual assault? What does that word mean? How does our relationship to gender inform how sexual assault impacts our community, both from within and from without? So go ahead and have that fun light chat.
So the idea
Things are getting quiet, so I'll just jump in. What are some of the things that came up in your group? What are some of the experiences or perspectives that came up?
that the government needs to spend more funds towards education, that a lot of the assaults in the United States are the result of lack of education. And although in a perfect world we should never we shouldn't have to tell people not to assault, the unfortunate reality is that there are a lot of individuals who have been assaulted, via battery, threats, and stuff like that. So if a bipartisan bill came to order, which would give funds towards prison programs for the accused, I think that would, in the long run, limit the amount of sexual assaults that are perpetrated in the state.
Awesome, thank you. What's your name?
Allie.
Allie, thank you. Anybody else? Did anything else come up in your conversations?
I went through advocacy training in town here at PABSA, which is the sexual assault program. And your first question was, what do we know about assault in the trans community? And I went through training to be an advocate for people who are sexually assaulted. The only thing I learned, and it was kind of a blanket about everyone, was that most people are assaulted by cis men, what Sean had brought up earlier. That was it. Like, that was the only training I got for trans people. So, and I was, trained to advocate. So there's a lack. That's what I figure.
Definitely. Thanks. What was your name?
Letitia.
Letitia. Thanks, Letitia.
What I think you're talking about is how there's a lot of manipulation that's involved, I think, more so with trans and in the queer community. It's not necessarily how we see it on TV where someone forced themselves on somebody else. It's more of the manipulation throughout the relationship, saying to make the person feel like they have to do some sexual thing to satisfy the person that they're with. And it might even be that the perpetrator is doing it to rationalize how rationalize to themselves that this person is being consensual with this, when in reality, the whole time they've been doing these things to control them.
Right. Thank you. What's your name?
Sebastian.
Sebastian, thanks. Erica?
Well, even though, like as Sean mentioned, the majority of assaults are perpetrated by cishet men, by no means exclusive to them. I personally do know of a number of trans women. I don't know them personally, but like they are notorious on Facebook for
These individuals?
these particular individuals are notorious for being rapists, and their targets have primarily been other trans feminine people. And that a lot of it is the result of exploitation of our vulnerability. Like Sebastian just talked about, like pressuring people into doing things that they wouldn't necessarily already do. One of the ways they do that is by threatening them in and then exploiting their hospitality as a way of getting sexual favors.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you. Sounds like there was some great discussion going on. Feel free to continue this later or even throughout our little chat here. I just wanted to talk about some of the myths that we might hold about sexual violence within the transgender community. I think, like Sean said, a lot of the media portrayals that we get of sexual violence in general are cisgender heterosexual men perpetrating violence against cisgender heterosexual women. And I think that that informs kind of our understanding of what violence would look like in the trans community when we break the mold. That's what we do as trans folks, both in amazing ways and in tragic ways. So, as opposed to in the cis-het world, where cis women tend to be victimized more often than cis men, and cis men tend to be perpetrators. I don't have any statistics about perpetrators of violence within the trans community, but we had this awesome, massive survey, the biggest survey yet of trans folks. And the report came out just last year. The survey took place in 2015. And we got to ask all kinds of questions about how folks experience violence in the world and in the community. Turns out that trans women experience sexual violence at astronomical rates, at 37%. It's ridiculous. 4 in 10 trans women have experienced sexual assault at some point in their lives. But that is the group that has experienced the least amount of sexual violence within the transgender community. It's not diminishing the sexual violence that's visited on trans women. But the group that experiences the most sexual violence in the trans community is non-binary folks who are assigned female at birth, at a rate of 58%. 6 in 10. Trans men are next at 51%. 51%, more than half of trans men have experienced sexual violence at some point in their lives. And then non-binary folks who are assigned male at birth experience sexual violence at a rate of 41%. So that kind of takes our, and that's why we do need resources, like Letitia said, that focus on what does violence look like for trans folks, because it looks very different. We bring all kinds of intersections into this with gender, with trans status, with sexual orientation, and gender presentation. All of that plays into it and kind of turns the whole thing on its head or throws it in a tumbler. So we can't just, go into our support for trans folks who have experienced sexual violence with just the kind of training that you would get to help folks who are cisgender who have experienced sexual violence. Also, there's a spectrum of sexual assault. A lot of folks think about sexual assault and think about rape. Like, I mean, that's obviously a terrible example of sexual assault. But there are so many ways to be assaulted in a sexual manner. From groping, from being verbally harassed in a sexual manner. If it makes you feel helpless, if it makes you feel out of control, if you don't have control, if it takes away your control, then that's assault. And that can be done with words as well as with hands, as well as with body parts. So let's not just think about rape here, because all of those experiences can be traumatic. And then I want to talk about what we think of for perpetrators of violence. What are some words that come to your mind about the general message we get from society about perpetrators of sexual violence? Throw some words out. Perverts.
Monster.
Monster.
He's actually a good guy.
Actually a good guy.
Yeah, he probably didn't do it.
Someone you know. Someone you know. That's great. I think that we get all different sides of that. I want to challenge us as we conceptualize perpetrators of violence, that if we only see perpetrators as perverts, as monsters, as inhuman, as demonic, then none of us is ever going to see ourselves as a potential perpetrator of violence. None of us is going to see our friends, the nice guys, the actually nice guys, as perpetrators of violence. But they can be. Most recently, in my most recent sexual assault, I was assaulted by this amazing transmasculine person who does this fantastic work in the community, advocating for trans folks, advocating for children. And I was completely blindsided when somebody who knows the trans struggle, I made clear boundaries, made them explicit, and woke up to them being violated. As somebody who knows what it's like to experience dysphoria and knows exactly how sex can trigger it in some ways, it just amplified the trauma and the sense of betrayal. But I don't think that they knew that what they were doing was wrong. I think that there is a lack of education, as Ali talked about. I think that a lot of folks who perpetrate violence think that what they're doing is okay. They rationalize it, like Sebastian was talking about. They may have created these situations, these elaborate situations, that brought somebody into that vulnerable spot, but then they tell themselves that they wanted to be there, otherwise they wouldn't be. You know, they tell themselves that that's consent, when it's absolutely not. Or they don't even know what consent means, or how it plays into sex. So we do need to educate folks to practice consent, to practice asking for consent, to practice giving consent. If we're all clear about what's okay and what's not okay, if it becomes a norm for us to talk about our expectations, our limits, our boundaries, then that norm is going to create a safer community. And so, what I want to do now is practice. I think a lot of folks have trouble asking for consent because it comes off as awkward. or weird or doesn't fit in the situation. First, I'm going to ask for 2 volunteers to role play a situation. And I just want to clarify, none of our situations will include role plays of rape. That crosses lines, that's what none of us need to put ourselves in that mindset, okay? So as I'm asking for volunteers, just know that. For this situation, I want to role play what it's like to be on a date, for things to be going fantastically well, and to find a good way to ask for consent to bring things to the next level. So I saw a hand over here. What's your name?
Leah.
Leah?
Can I choose the person?
If the person agrees.
You agree?
On me.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Do we need chairs?
Sure, bring some chairs up. Say that Leah gets it home, and Leah's really interested. What's your name?
Christy.
Christy. Okay. Christy, maybe you're interested in having Leah come up to your place for another Christy.
Okay.
Let's see what it looks like to let each other know what you're comfortable with in necessary.
Okay. So this is my house.
Tour guide?
Yeah, you want to take a tour? Yep. Want to go inside? Can't. Nope. Monthly biz. Kind of monthly biz. Business. Okay. Okay. Sounds good. Maybe next time. All right. Have a good night.
So now I can see you a little and kind of like.
We ready to wrap up? All right. So who thought that was maybe a little awkward? Was it because you didn't know the person you were talking to? That you were asking to have sex with you? That makes sense. But I think it's important for us to picture ways that we can ask for consent, to practice this, at least in our own heads, if not out loud, by ourselves in our bedroom. There's so many ways that you can ask for consent to have sex, or to do anything, to hold hands, without being awkward. Hey, can we go up to your bedroom so I can rock your world? It doesn't have to be weird, it doesn't have to be awkward, it doesn't have to be embarrassing or uncomfortable. Let's just ask for permission, okay? And now, I want to talk about another misconception, and that's how folks respond to sexual violence. A lot of folks think that, in emergency situations, there's either the fight instinct or the flight instinct. But a lot of people don't think about the freeze instinct, which tends to be a lot of folks' reaction when they find themselves in surprising situations where they're being victimized in traumatic ways. It's like, I don't know if you've ever watched the nature shows with the gazelle in the lioness's jaws. It's not fighting. It's not trying to get away. Once it's in those jaws, it knows it's done. It just freezes, lets it happen. And that was my response in my situations, where, and it's so easy to look back and judge yourself. Why didn't I scream out? Why didn't I say, stop it? Why didn't I do anything? Why didn't I move? It's because you're experiencing trauma. You're not functioning like a normal person over dinner. You're not saying, no thanks, I don't want any salt. You're saying, stop traumatizing me. And it's hard for you to respond verbally or even physically in situations like that sometimes. And that's an okay thing. But what I think might help us a little bit is if we're used to saying no. If we can practice saying no. Can I get 2 volunteers? Allie, thank you. Awesome, thank you. Coming up here. I'll give some more guidance for this one. So, you're on the couch together after this fantastic date. You just Netflixed and chilled for a bit, sitting on the couch.
Like, really? Like,
Right.
okay. Letitia.
Letitia really wants to kiss Allie. So she leans in for a kiss.
No thanks, miss.
I hardly even got there.
Well, I'm unlike Miguel Cabrera. I don't hit for doubles. I'm Derek Jeter. I go for singles. So we'll stick to first base, though.
Okay, I like baseball.
Favorite team?
I'm really into the Milwaukee Brewers.
I like the Chicago Cubs.
Oh, shoot.
Here's the situation.
I don't know if we can see each other again.
Well, see, this is proof that I've never been on a date in my life. So, all right, well, thank you very much.
No, that's okay. I still enjoy a friendly rivalry.
Thank you very much.
So I think that it's important for us to be comfortable to saying no to folks. Whether it's, hey, do you want to volunteer to do this thing? Or, hey, do you want some more pie? Or, hey, I'm about to kiss you. No thanks. No, I'm good, thanks. Today I got to practice saying no thank you to somebody who asked me if they could compliment me on the street. So it was weird. No thanks. When we can practice saying no, in our heads, by ourselves, in our bedroom, when we can picture these situations, visualize them, visualize somebody who maybe starting to touch you in a way that you don't like. You can stop that. No thank you. You know, we need to be thinking about these things so that when the rubber hits the road, we'll be less likely to freeze in those situations and more likely to firmly stick to our limits. That's not to say that if you practice and do everything right, you won't freeze up in traumatic situations, because you might, and you can't blame yourself for that. That's your reaction to trauma. So, I'm glad we had this chat. I'd like to hand you back to Sean.
Sweet. Cool. So thank you so much for that. I thought you were just going to be speaking, and when we had talked ahead of time and she said, no, I really want this to be a conversation and I want people to be involved, it was like, oh, I hope people will be involved and try and participate. This is northern Minnesota. Minnesota is the thing. So at this point, I want to invite our panel members to come up to the stage. So when we, myself and Erica and Orion and Peng, who Shina mentioned, when we started thinking about this event, we knew we wanted someone to come and speak, and we also thought, wouldn't it be great if we had people from Duluth here who are doing this work, who interact with folks all the time, who are working with, you know, whether it's survivors of violence or if it's folks in the trans community, whatever it was. We wanted to get some people up here to be able to share a little bit more about what's happening here and maybe talk about what could be better and what could be going a little bit better here. So, I want to go through and introduce everybody, and then I'm going to have each of them share a little bit more about who they are and what they do and why. But, okay, so Nicole joined us on the panel. We all know her, she's great, thank you. And then next we've got Jameson Danielson. Jameson is the Syringe Access Assistant Program Manager and Health Educator at Rural AIDS Action Network, also known as RAN. He does harm reduction work with IV drug users with a trauma-informed approach and trains on and distributes Narcan. He also does HIV and Hep C testing and provides resources to further care. And he is a community educator on these and other intersectional topics. So thanks to Jameson, my friend and collaborator a lot of times, for being here. Next, who's next? Rose Brooks. Wave. That's Rose. Rose is the program coordinator for UMD's Office of Diversity and Inclusion, Sexuality, and Gender Equity Initiatives, working to empower queer and trans plus students in their academic and personal endeavors at UMD. They also serve as the Chief Operations Officer for the Midwest Institute for Sexuality and Gender Diversity, where they oversee programmatic and assessment efforts. And then next, we have Christy Beaver here. So Christy is the Community Education and Development Coordinator at Safe Haven. She provides education and training to a wide variety of folks throughout our community on domestic violence, prevention and response, oppression and inequality, healthy and unhealthy relationships, violence in the workplace, teen dating, consent in relationships, and any other related topic. So thanks to Christy. And then we have Amy. Amy Brooks. I work with Amy at NS Peacemakers, and she is the Victim Advocacy Coordinator there. She supports survivors of domestic and sexual violence through a restorative healing process. She provides voluntary restorative support circles, one-on-one support and direct advocacy, and systems advocacy for survivors. So I want to thank all of them for being here, joining us, and at this time I want to, is that mic ready to go? It might be muted. But the first thing that I would like them to do is tell us a little bit more about who they are and what work they're doing and maybe why they're doing that work and how they got there. So you don't have to answer all of those, but is it working?
Only if you consent.
Yes, whoever consents to go first.
Hi, everybody. I'm very glad and very honored to be here, yes, to be part of the panel. A little bit about me. I moved to Duluth about, everybody hear me okay? Yeah. I moved to Duluth about 8 years ago with my two boys. I ended up going back to school and getting a social work degree at UWS. Graduated in 2015. I guess what's really important to me is working towards ending oppression of all people. And it's brought me to doing the work that I do. I believe that it's really important to be able to work with people who have differences in opinion to achieve common goals. And as Sean said, I am an advocate working with survivors of domestic violence. And basically, my approach is meeting people where they are and not offering up advice or telling people how they should do things, but I believe that people inherently know what's best for them. You just have to have those conversations, and that's a big part of my work as a person.
Let's go down the line.
So I'm Christy. I was drawn to Safe Haven originally because I'm a survivor of intimate partner violence. Not the physical kind we typically think about when we think about domestic violence, but the more subtle, emotional, coercive sort of bullshit. Yeah, so it was kind of my calling to this position. to bring more awareness to those pieces and reach out to all sorts of different folks talking about healthy and unhealthy relationships and just spreading some knowledge that we don't talk about in public schools or anything. Like, we talk about STDs like it's the plague, and that's pretty much it for sex ed, yeah? We don't talk about the actual relationships that can be a part of sex. So that's a pretty cool thing about this position. And I forgot the rest of it, so that's where I'm gonna start.
That was great.
Hey, hi, hello. Again, my name is Rose. You can also call me RB. I use they, them pronouns. And I've been in Duluth for almost exactly a year. I think tomorrow or the next day is 1 year of being in Duluth. Moved here for the job that I currently have at UMD, working in our Office of Diversity and Inclusion, working specifically with queer and trans students. The job is very similar to one that I held during my graduate program, which I came straight out of to come up here. I spent 2 years in Kansas, which if you know anything about Kansas, it is not a great place for queer and trans folk, but I was doing very similar work in my program, and had a part-time position through that program to be able to work with students there, and so I've been doing this for a minute. It's not exactly easy work even in a college setting with a certain bolstering of resources, but there's not really the appropriate amount of resources for the work that I do. I'm a party of one, specifically, the only full-time person who does my demographic of folks. And so that makes it very tricky also. My position with my nonprofit, I actually am also the founder of that nonprofit, and it was birthed out of a Midwest regional LGBT conference that has existed for 25 years, as some folks in this room have been to. I planned the 2014 Midwest Bisexual, Lesbian, Gay, Transgender Ally College Conference, MumbleTech for short, because no one wants to say that many times. I planned the 2014 one, and if you're not familiar with that conference, it's about a 2,000 person conference that attracts LGBTQ college students in the Midwest. And so that conference has existed for 25 some odd years and has been inherently homeless, if you will. No organization has been overseeing that, so it's been passed off from student group to student group year after year after year. Somehow it's still alive. And so we founded a nonprofit to oversee that. And so that's been kind of the past year and a half of my life too, has been doing all of the logistics and having us file for official nonprofit status, which we now are. And so that is my life outside of my 9 to 5. That's funny. I don't go to work at 9 o'clock in the morning. My full time, and then I also have been, since I got here, I've been very quickly saturated in doing organizing work with Trans Plus.
I'm Jamo. I work for the Rural AIDS Action Network, and as Sean explained a little bit, I work with IV drug users. What's the next question? Why do I do that? Okay. I guess really why I do anything in life is I'm all about ending stigma. So in my role at work, we are all trying to end HIV stigma, trans stigma, stigma against IV drug users. Personally, I have a background of drug use and homelessness and other trauma-related things. So I feel like I can really meet people where they're at, and when they tell me about something in life, I'm not like, oh, that sucks. I can actually help them out with resources or just being here who actually gets it. What else? I'm also like, I'm the human version of Dory from Nemo. So. That's it? Cool.
Hi, I'm Nicole.
You should have went first. No, it doesn't. Just yell.
Just yell.
This one is not. Yeah.
Just tell me what you want to say, I'll say it for you.
All right, thanks for that. Here's the first question that I wanted to ask to each of you. If you are willing to speak to what types of services do you or your organization provide for trans and non-binary folks And if there's nothing specific, which I don't really know of a lot of places that do that specific work, what is preventing organizations from having this conversation and offering services?
One more time, what was that?
Yeah. So what types of services does Safe Haven provide, or whichever organization you're from, for trans and non-binary folks? And if there isn't any, like what can we do to get that conversation going a little bit more?
Yeah, so there's nothing at Safe Haven that's specifically for trans and non-binary folks. We just got our board to approve our new mission statement that is slightly more inclusive. I fought so hard for this, but it's now, oh gosh, I'm gonna get it wrong. But anyway, so the language in it is women, children, and all survivors. So I mean, it's a step in the right direction. Yeah, so our services are, we're a domestic violence shelter. And we provide victim advocacy, which is still called women's advocacy. Our shelter right now accepts anyone who identifies as a woman. When I asked about our specific, procedures, like what would we do if someone called, and we don't ask how people identify when they call the crisis hotline. What would we do if someone did self-identify as non-binary, or they showed up at the shelter and, were very gender ambiguous or looked more masculine? What would be our reaction? So it was met with some conflicting answers to varying degrees of moderately okay to, oh, that's adding more trauma. So, yeah, so it's going to be a process. Change doesn't happen immediately. But we do have a legal advocacy at our walk-in resource center too. So we're able to serve a wide variety of folks at the resource center, since it's not a shelter and it's not stuck quite so much in the original battered women's movement. But we're still all part of the Safe Haven blanket. Yeah, so we can help out with the legal processes, self-sufficiency services like aiding housing, employment, education, childcare, transportation, just all the different pieces that go into rebuilding from wherever you're at after intimate partner violence. Yeah, as well as some support groups, which are still very geared towards cisgender women. Yeah. There was something else I'm coming at. Oh, so Safe Haven was very much founded in the heyday of the battered women's movement. We were kind of a big part of the beginnings of that. It was like the third shelter founded in the country. Fun fact. Yeah, so it's taken a while to kind of start to step away from this framework that is very trans exclusionary, radical feminism. Yeah, it's the beginnings of a very slow process of slowly getting new people to our board. So join some nonprofit boards, please do. Okay.
Okay, although we don't offer programming specifically for designed for trans and non-binary folks at this time, the DVRC program that I work within has provided advocacy to the trans plus community. Sorry, I have to have notes. So, yeah, that's it. I guess that's all I have to say on that.
Passing it. Here comes.
As the token leader for career at UMD, I am perpetually having to navigate figuring out how to insert conversations about trans and NB folk into what is already happening. I'm the second person ever to hold the position that I'm currently in. The person before me was a cis-identified individual, and so I think that has a residual, long-lasting, deeply rooted impact on the programming that was happening out of that unit, my unit, me. And so I know in the past year that I've been here, I've definitely prioritized programming that centers trans and non-binary folk because I know that that's necessary. Held the first Trans Day Remembrance Vigil on campus, from my understanding that took place in November. But with that has come kind of this, I feel like I'm perpetually doing programming that centers the violence of trans and non-binary folk because that tends to be what kind of our recognition days tend to be centered around. And so I get tasked with kind of doing the yucky work that doesn't feel good, but I'm also the only full-time person that is going to be doing it. For example, I've been semi-tasked, voluntold, that I'm supposed to convene this task force work group, fill in the blank language that we like to use for higher ed groups that try to do things, to tackle, and create recommendations for a statistic that came out of our campus climate survey results that came out this past fall, and that's just a big holistic snapshot that takes a lot of time and it takes a lot of money, and really there's no surprises when you get the results, but then you have data to be able to leverage and say, hey, person making the big decisions with the 6 figures, I'm trying to tell you that this is a thing. I tried to tell you already, but now we have a number, so can we actually do the thing? So we had the statistics as far as the snapshot of sexual violence on our campus that noted that trans folks or self-identified trans folks that took the survey were disproportionately impacted by sexual violence of some variety. I think 44% of folks that indicated that they identify as trans also indicated that they had been impacted by sexual violence in some type of way, and that was more than women-identified folk that had taken the survey. And so I get the lovely task, right, of convening a work group to tackle that, right? And I was told who my work group is, and I'm like, I might have other suggestions of what to do with that. Let me list the ways. So it always feels like doing the yucky work, and so because some of that stuff gets handed to me, this is a priority for the campus. It's kind of been playing 2 roles of, because I'm the token person tasked with doing basically the entire spread of LGBTQIA work on campus, I need to be working directly with my students, which are supposed to be my priority, and they are, but also getting pulled in kind of the direction of fixing institutional issues because no one else knows how to do them. So I'm perpetually kind of pulled with, I'd like to do programming, I'd like to do better services for students, but I'm getting tasked with things from the powers that be above me, which feels good, but then also I can't always get all of my stuff done. Weird. Don't look at my inbox, and don't look at my desk, and so it's a taffy pull. I'd like to be doing more programming, but I'm also expected to cater to the entire spectrum of queer and trans folk when I just want to be centering trans folk because that's what I'd rather be doing.
I hope they pay you $1 million. You are only one human. Like, that's not even fair.
That's cute. I'm getting a 2% merit-based increase.
2%.
I can't really say that we provide like trans-specific services. We do have trans folk who are using and accessing our services, and we're able to hook them up with all kinds of resources. And throughout the past several years, RAN has provided space for our trans plus support group and some other funding stuff for our trans group.
I'm happy to say that everything we do at Transforming Family is of and for trans folk and non-binary folk. And because we're kind of a small organization, we've only got a few hundred families, we can be very, very agile with the services that we're providing. Monthly, we provide peer support networks and peer support groups where if parents are having troubles with a particular issue, then we can just discuss that amongst the parents. We break out, so the teens, the trans teens, get together, and the trans chitlins go off and play together. It's so amazing because I mean we've got trans kids and we've got their siblings and we've got you know, sometimes they want to bring their best friend with them, and it makes sense. It's perfectly awesome. And so we've got like this room filled with kids, and you have no idea who's trans, and none of them have any idea who's trans. They just know, hey, this is my name, these are my pronouns, and it's just accepted, and it's like this beautiful picture of the world. But I'm sorry, I get excited about our work. But then also for like the teens, then I get to be really agile with meeting them where they're at. If they're having issues with relationships, if they're having issues with their school or with violence in their peer group, if they're trying to deal with trans misogyny or binarism within our group or within society in general, then I get to provide those resources for them and just meet them where they're at and give them some counseling and guidance and support in as they're navigating life as a young trans person. So if you know of any young trans folks who need some support, which would be pretty much every young trans person I know, please send them our way. Let them know about Transforming Families. We are based in Twin Cities, but we have families all across Minnesota and Wisconsin that are accessing our resources. I think even one in like North Dakota.
So I did have one more question, but I see that we've got about 10 minutes left, so I wanted to open it up for questions from the audience or any of our panel members.